All right. Well, I want to welcome everyone to another session of our three questions. Very excited today. We've got PK from the Fifth Ingredient here, one of our partners and our beer brewery rather management software partner, and which is great because we can hear right from the source all about the Fifth Ingredient, and we've got our three questions ready to go. So I will turn things over to you, PK, to start off with. Perhaps before we get into our three questions, just tell us a little bit more about the Fifth Ingredient.
Yeah, for sure. So the idea behind the fifth ingredient really comes from my days as a process engineer at Ballast Point Brewing in San Diego. And after I left, I really wanted to consult for breweries and quickly realized that so many breweries were on paper logs, whiteboards, and spreadsheets. And so the idea really became, well, the four ingredients in beer: water, malt, hops, yeast, and the fifth ingredient is data. And so everything we do really revolves around data for a brewery. And so Beer30 is actually our flagship software system that breweries are able to use to track their data from start to finish, from grain to glass. And so the concept that we have with this is that in Beer30, you're pretty much tracking as much data as you'd like or as little as you'd like, and go down the process of raw materials and purchase orders to the actual brewing process, lab quality, sensory, yeast management, to sales orders and distribution routes and planning, to the accounting integration, and then taking all that information to tie it in with the demand planning and future forecasting. And so that's really how the whole entire Beer 30 story is tied in with Brew More, Brew Better as a whole, and how you can actually use Beer 30 to help your brewery out.
That's great. And one of the things that I'm a big fan of, and that I'm talking a lot with different breweries, is you mentioned it before, is data, right? Is how can you use that to run better? So that is something that a theme, and I think it's a growing theme for the industry. So, with that said, I'll dive right into one of the first questions. Is what's an example of a feature set or something capable in Beer30 that starts a brewery that it could be savings on day one? And I ask you that because that is a lot of the early questions that I get is, okay, what could it do out of the box that I could probably implement right after you leave?
Yeah, that's great. So the first thing I'd point out is that Beer 30 is very modular. So you can pick and choose which modules that you need. So based on the entire supply chain that I told you, our core fundamentals resolve in our production suite. And so pretty much the production suite has everything for dashboards, scheduling and tank management, KPI scorecards, and all the data for brew, ferment, filter, bright tank package. And so the way our system is set up is that one of the biggest pain points that people have in other systems is that it can take weeks to months to get up and running. And so Beer 30 is really designed where in a 90-minute training session with our customer experience team, you should feel comfortable getting up and running and into your system. And what you'll do at that point in this training session immediately after on day one is go ahead and define your grains, hops, adjuncts, yeast, your packaging types, and you're onboarding your tanks immediately. So the idea is right out of the box, instead of adding in hundreds of recipes you've ever done, you're just going one tank at a time at your brewery and marking it as either empty or with beer in it. And if it has beer in it, you're just making that one recipe, and you can add in the dollar value that's there associated with it. So realistically, we've had breweries that within 24 hours of training, they've entered everything into the system. By 36 hours, they're actually brewing with it. And we have testimonials online about that. And so really the first thing I want to just point out is that that's how quick it is to get up and running. And so immediately, Dan, as soon as you get in, spend that hour and a half entering in that initial data set, you're immediately opened up to the entire realm of being able to see exactly what's there from a dollar value perspective in each of your tanks. If you're using it to calculate cost of goods and inventory, you know exactly the dollar value for all your inventory on hand for raw materials and packaging supplies. You know immediately what's going on when it comes to taking brew data, brew metrics, and actually tying in with those recipes. And even on things like fermentation, being able to visually start seeing graphs as to how fermentation curves are starting off and then kind of how they're going. So that's the beauty behind this is that right out of the box, you're seeing visualizations, you're understanding what's happening on a tank by tank basis, and you're starting off fresh in the system with that snapshot of where you are actually real world, which then you just mimic directly in the Beer30. And customers love that because they're not trying to go in and enter in back data for the last 6 months, 3 years, etc. It's fresh, it's clean data, and it's always as powerful as data in, data out with something like Beer30 or any software system. So it all ties in very nicely.
That makes sense, and I like that you brought up the testimonials too that I've seen on your site, and I really encourage some of our members to take a look at that, because one of the things that I hear when talking to someone is that testimonial really is that referral from a brewery who said, maybe I was skeptical. I tried this. We were at a certain stage, and I am actually have been able to see the results. The onboarding process, everything you mentioned, worked, and I think that's important. That's a question that I receive a lot too. Is what I think is less important, obviously, is saying like who else has used this and what is some of the success that they're seeing. So those testimonials, I think, really are powerful, and glad you guys share those.
Yeah, and at this point, we have as a whole, I think about 450 breweries we're working with across 18 to 19 countries. And our smallest brewery does about 70 barrels a year, and our largest one does about 60 to 70,000. So we have the full spectrum, and people are picking and choosing what they need. And that's just the beauty behind Beer30, that it's modular and tiered pricing. So that way you're only paying for what you use based on your actual size and implementation.
Well, one of that actually leads into my next question here. And like I said, one conversation is that brewery, different sizes, trying to figure out if this is going to be a tool that's going to help them and the ability to do that. The other one that I get is a brewery that may have had or has a brewery management platform today. I've heard of some that have said we had one in the past, and for whatever reason, they went away from it. And so now there's this different type of skepticism. I think they're saying, why do I need this? What is different? And so that would be my second question is, what do you say to a brewery who has had maybe a bad experience with the previous platform?
That's a great question. I think the biggest aspects that in general, regardless of whether you pick Beer30 or you pick one of our competitors, if you're trying to do something with brewery management software systems, I think the biggest problem that people have is that they don't outline what the scope is or the phases of success. And this is just the basics of project management as a whole, which is that for something like Beer30 implementation, you want to make sure that you are really figuring out what needs you have and how the system solves it. And so for people that have used different softwares before, I think the biggest thing that we always pride ourselves on is one, collectively on the team, we have over 130 plus years of brewing experience, going from brewing, cellar, packaging, brewmasters, head brewers, COOs, process engineers, things like that. So it really helps us from our understanding of how breweries actually operate, which is very different than a lot of other systems where they may be more accounting focused. But we also understand how accounting works as well, because at the end of the day, brewing is the harder piece because beer is not a simple widget. And then the other piece is that from our customer support aspect, we use WhatsApp and private groups for each of our customers. And so we have a channel where you're interacting directly with my team and our company and your entire brewery staff. And so it becomes a great way to have questions going back and forth. And our last metric is that about 77% of our customers, 77% of our tickets, excuse me, are responded to within 30 minutes. So again, 77% of tickets within 30 minutes is amazing. And so those are like two of the big pain points of people not knowing how systems work on other brewery software systems, how brewers operate, and then that customer support aspect. And now when it comes to the software itself, there's some very key tangibles that differentiate us. And so an example that I like giving people is that in other software systems, you may be locked out of brewing if the inventory doesn't exist, right? Which from an accounting standpoint, that sounds great. Like if somebody hasn't entered in raw materials or a bag of grain into an inventory system, how do you expect a brewer to turn that into work in process? But in reality, if you're a brewer and you are mashing in at 5 a.m., well, at 5 a.m., if your inventory system says, hey, you can't brew, you as a brewer are not going to stop what you're doing to track down a purchase order, enter in that information just to get yourself unstuck. You're just going to say, well, I'm either going to add this on a piece of paper or I'm going to enter in fake data. Right. And so with that, as in a concrete example, in Beer30, we allow items to be untracked. And so you can always go in, mark them as untracked, use them for the brewing production day, do all the different steps in between. Where in other systems, if you go all the way from like brewing to fermenting to filter to package to sales, if you make a mistake in any of the process, to fix it, you have to roll back to that initial step. In this case, you make the edit to whatever lot number or quantity or dollar value it is, and we retroactively update all that for you on our own. And so that's like a beauty behind this, where people just get so bogged down where it's like, we need a full-time person for software systems. And if the software is designed correctly, that's not really necessary because they understand the way brewers operate, which is what Beer30 is designed to do, and really focus on that customer experience and training aspect, where we can do things like split batches, merges, understanding how yeast propagation works, and how that ties in with your inventory and yeast genealogy and health. And so all the cool things to like geek out about from a quality and process perspective, our team can not only do on the software side, but a lot of us have already done that in the actual brewery floor itself.
That's great. And you know, when you talk a little bit about that, I think of some of the complaints I hear sometimes where what you'd mentioned was an example of what it can do, you know, when you're sitting in front of a computer like that, or you're entering in a tablet, and those real world applications and those real world challenges, it really, I think, has to be a platform that can be used and then adjusted for when those conditions aren't identical to, you know, of that. It seems like you guys, like you had mentioned previously, come at it from a brewery mindset rather than an accounting mindset or a software mindset. It just seems to factor that in, as you gave that example of maybe some of the headaches that have come previously with other platforms. So that I really appreciate that. And you know, my last question for you here, PK, is something that, you know, I know we'll both be at CBC next week, and probably having a lot of good conversations. I think my biggest question that I have is, let's say I am a, you know, I know you said you work with a lot of different sizes, but I'm a 5,000, 7,000 barrel annual brewery, and what is it that you would say to them, or why should they be coming up to you and challenging or reaching out and saying, tell me more, what can you do for my organization? I think that's the big question that is left is, you know, why should they even bother if they haven't used the platform up until this point?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. The way I like describing this in some of the presentations that I give is, at the end of the day, there's three key factors that really set breweries apart. Right? The first one is people that are able to have high quality beer. Second one is people that are really able to focus on their profits. And third one are breweries that are able to focus in on their efficiency. And so each of these three aspects of quality, well, you got to keep your customers happy. If you make poor beer, I'm just as easily going to go right down the street to a different brewery and, you know, drink beer there. Profits, well, if you're not able to make profit off of the beer that you're producing, you're going to have issues of staying in business. And when it comes to efficiency, if you're constantly thinking about getting more getting more tanks, more capital expenditures, things like that, you're really not getting the most out of your system right now. And that's going to lead to just more inefficiencies and just losses overall. And so when you start thinking about the fact that it's cool having brewing as a hobby, but when it's actually a full-time business, you need the tools to understand how that's going and how your business is performing. So when you actually start looking at it, I'm actually going to screen share this diagram, which I think is going to be really cool to see. Um, this is on our website, and we actually rolled this out for CBC as part of our version 10 huge kickoff. There's a full loop that comes in that Beer30 is able to help solve for a brewery. And again, you can pick and choose what you need about it, but really the first aspect is scheduling. And with Beer30, you're able to go in, focus on recipe created tasks, real-time alerts, and production-driven scheduling. Right? Where that on its own, if you're at that scale point, if you're at that influx point, this is critical for you to understand exactly how your team is performing on a day-by-day basis and remove all the redundancies and whiteboards that tie in, where if you don't have a system, it's just constant manual entries or text messages and things that are happening. From there, based on scheduling, MRP, material resource planning, raw materials, packaging, supplies, and orders. Do I have the raw materials and supplies on hand to be able to brew or package, right? Key fundamentals that tie in only if you understand what's happening from a scheduling perspective. So now I've scheduled the beer, I have my ingredients, then we get into production. right? And so that focuses on brew to package process, quality and sensory, and batch history to really understand what's happening from the overall start to finish of the entire process and the actual breakdown of how that entire beer has gone. Right? When you break it down, a batch history for a beer could have well over 300, 400 data points because you're tracking all that amongst brew, ferment, filter, bright tank, package, yeast, quality metrics. You have well over 300 collectively that all tie in with batch history. So now you've made the beer, well, you got to sell it. And so we get into sales, which ties in with order management, delivery, and a really cool module in Beer30 that ties in with sales traceability. With the idea there really being that you want to make sure that you're adding batch codes to beer that's going into the market, where in case you ever have a product recall for any reason, you know exactly who's impacted by it and when. And so that ties in from the sales management side. And now that you've sold a beer, well, let's look at the finances behind it. So reporting such as TTB, the analysis aspects that tie in with breaking down week over week, month over month sales, getting into accounting integration where we integrate with both QuickBooks Online and Xero. And we're also one of the unique softwares that was really built with a mentality of make your accountant love your system. And we offer breweries both APAR syncing or general ledger syncing, which is so unique to us that other systems don't really offer based on the way we do alerts and real-time adjustments to different ledger accounts from accounting. And then finally, cost of goods sold, where if you're making sales, you want to know exactly how much that beer is costing you. And so there's a very magical component of knowing that this pint of beer or this six pack or this keg has these true costs of goods from all of your ingredients and not assuming average cost of goods, but actual true cost of goods based off of those lot numbers and some of the traceability aspects. And then finally, you've finished up making that beer, selling and reporting. We'll use that information for the beautiful demand planning module, which we just rolled out last week and we're demoing throughout CBC. So definitely check that out. And with the demand planning, you're looking at combining together sales forecasts, demand reports, and sales forecasts, production forecasts to build that demand report where it's aggregating together everything that sales is saying that they're wanting to sell, and production is saying this is how I can produce it to get that all-in-one demand report to then take that demand report and generate an actual schedule for what needs to be brewed when. And so this is that loop that's constantly happening at a brewery. And whether you're at 1,000 barrels, 5,000 barrels, 7,000, or well beyond, this loop needs to happen if you want to stay in business, because otherwise you're just really focused on not knowing exactly what needs to be done based on market decisions and what's out there. And so that's why this loop and this whole element of closing the gap between demand planning all the way to scheduling is so critical that any brewery of size, especially if you're in that like 5, 7, 10,000 range and you're scaling, or even the younger or the younger ones, the ones that are in 1, 2,000 younger in terms of barrel volume, even those need to have the same process in place to be able to scale as expected.
Well, PK, I really like that, from a procurement standpoint, the fact that you ended on a process loop speaks to me. I love a good process document, but it's so true. So often I feel like I'm talking to a brewery owner and they sometimes it'll come up that they're doing it the same way when it was them and their brother-in-law opened 5 years ago,
Sure.
right? And now they've got 6 team members. They're not even doing the brewing, and they're growing, and that process hasn't evolved, or it really hasn't been spelled out to that degree of all the different elements of that. And another theme that I've heard a lot too from a lot of people is that transition from a hobby to this is our business, and as it gets more complicated and as you and the importance of quality and profit and all of that. So these are themes that I'm sure we'll continue to hear next week at CBC, but I'm hearing them from a lot of breweries that it's one of those many hats that those owners wear, and looking for these tools that can help them. So I really want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule on a busy week here to put some information out. I know that our federation members who are watching this have know that they can get a hold of your team easily for that demo, booking that demo, get more information. So we'll make sure that this accompanies that. And there's just a lot of different ways to get a hold of your team to get started,
Sure.
as well as coming at CBC.
Yeah, for sure. And if you're visiting CBC, we're hosting an event on Sunday night at Jackalope Brewing Co., hosting it with Craft Beer Professionals, Arrive, Plato, and a few other companies. So come on out on Sunday night to Jackalope Brewing at 7 p.m. And then, we'll be at booth number 2206. So stop on by. We'll have some swag. We're also doing a selfie contest and some other cool things. So definitely stop by the booth, learn more about the system and how we can actually help your brewery brew more, brew better with Beer30.
Great. Thanks again for the time, PK. We'll
Thanks,
talk
man.
soon.
Yeah, cheers, man. Bye.